It's an ideology with a wide reach and a controversial past. It inspires movements and has been associated with violence. So what is Wahhabism? Wahhabism is named after its founder, 18th century theologian Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. He was born in 1703 in the city of Al-Uyayna to a family of clerics in a region of Arabia called Najd, about 70 kilometers northwest of Riyadh, the capital of modern-day Saudi Arabia. He founded the Wahhabi doctrine around 11 centuries after the advent of Islam, and was inspired by the well-known 13th century theologian Ibn Taymiyyah. With his movement, Abdul Wahhab said he wanted to bring Muslims back to what he felt were the basics of Islam, because according to him, they had deviated away from the pure religion. In Abdul Wahhab's most famous book, Kitab al-Tawheed, or the Book of the Oneness of God, he emphasizes that any misplaced reverence is an assault on God's unity itself. Much of the book warns against anything that he felt could be perceived as shirk, or ascribing partners to God, including some practices that remain part of the cultural fabric of Islamic spirituality, such as intercession, devotion at graves, and drawing pictures or images.
Abdul Wahhab's followers and his supporters say that Muslims had strayed so badly from the pure teachings of Islam that they started, deifying trees and saintly figures and so on and so forth. Abdul Wahhab's opponents say that there was nothing like that, that these people basically accuse good Muslims of being fallen Muslims.
Yasser Qadhi, dean of the Islamic Seminary of America, says he was very much inclined towards the ideology a few decades ago and understands its appeal, but now finds parts of it to be problematic.
The original manifestation by Ibn Abdul Wahhab himself was actually not only quite militant, but also quite fanatical in its excommunication of pretty much the entire world. Ibn Abdul Wahhab viewed the Ottoman Empire as being a manifestation of a pagan, un-Islamic, non-Islamic, anti-Islamic empire. And that essentially meant that he viewed the entire world around him to be non-Muslims other than his own one group. So if you wanted to be a Muslim, you had to be with him. Now, this version is not taught anymore. This version has been completely reoriented. Modern adherents to the school do not view this at all. In fact, it's difficult for them to even imagine Ibn Abdul Wahhab would actually say things like this, even though, of course, it's pretty clear in his books.
In 1744, Abdul Wahhab secured a pact with Muhammad ibn al-Saud, the founder of the first Saudi dynasty in Arabia. As the Ottoman Empire dissolved in the early 20th century, the al-Saud family was able to crystallize its power across both regions of what was then Najd and the Kingdom of Hejaz, and with the help of the British was able to create the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in 1932. The initial agreement has been described as
a political religious pact based on the purification of Islamic practices from popular religion, and an emphasis on strict monotheism. The Saud family has maintained its role of political and military leadership in the modern-day Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, with the descendants of Ibn Abdul Wahhab continuing to serve as religious advisors.
إنما سعينا إن شاء الله فيما يظهر الحق ويعلو والأباطيل من تأمل الشيخ وتدبرها وقرأ كتبه رأى حقا أن هذه دعوة صالحة موافقة للكتاب والسنة وأن الله جل وعلا هيأ لها الإمام محمد سعود وأولاده فحموا هذه الدعوة وقاموا بها ونصروها وأيدوها.
But many feel that this is exclusionary towards other schools of thought.
If you read his writings and you go over his textbooks, if you have chosen to reject my teachings, then you have essentially chosen to reject Islam.
PBS Frontline describes the Wahhabi creed in these words.
For more than 2 centuries, Wahhabism has been Saudi Arabia's dominant faith. It is an austere form of Islam that insists on a literal interpretation of the Quran. Strict Wahhabis believe that all those who don't practice their form of Islam are heathens and enemies.
And this Saudi scholar confirms the point.
من كتبه أنه يكفر المسلمين إنما يكفر من كفره الله ورسوله وأجمع المسلمون على تكفيره أما أنه يستقل بمسألة ويكفر فيها.
Aidan Bayram says in his academic paper, The Rise of Wahhabi Sectarianism and Its Impact in Saudi Arabia,
they see other Muslims who do not think like Wahhabis as associating partners with God. Thus, their blood and goods are permissible for Wahhabis.
It's terribly dangerous when you take a look at individuals from within the Muslim community utilizing rhetoric like that around takfir and calling one another a disbeliever. It creates obviously a lot of hatred, a lot of animosity, and really sort of so different than sort of the embracement of the importance of ummah and community within Islamic tradition.
Wahhabism was able to spread with the help of Saudi petrodollars. Journalist Farid Zakaria says in a 2016 Washington Post column,
"In the 1950s, Saudi Arabia's Wahhabi version of Islam, a product of nomadic desert culture, was practiced by a tiny minority of Muslims, perhaps 1 to 2%. Then came the oil boom, and Saudi Arabia, flush with cash, spread these ideas throughout the Muslim world."
The reach of Wahhabism outside the Arabian Peninsula has been far and wide. The UK-based Henry Jackson Society released a report in 2017 stating that Saudi Arabia,
since the 1960s, has sponsored a multi-million-dollar effort to export Wahhabi Islam across the Islamic world, including to Muslim communities in the West.
In his book The Wahhabi Code, Terence Ward states that in Pakistan,
General Zia-ul-Haq, after seizing power in 1977, imposed Sharia law and then gave carte blanche to create countless Saudi-funded Wahhabi madrasas.
Hasanbayev is a Muslim Chechen-American surgeon who worked under fire during the Second Chechen War. He describes his encounters with Wahhabis from Saudi Arabia in his memoir The Oath.
These so-called Wahhabis were beginning to cause problems in Chechnya. They claimed our Chechen traditions contradicted the Quran.
In another passage of his memoir, he states,
I had been told that the Wahhabis offered young men what we considered large sums, from $100 to $200 a month, to join their movement.
Asmi Malik and Scott Edwards say in the conversation,
in Malaysia, Saudi Arabia also donates to schools and universities to spread their conservative views.
But Wahhabism, which is actually a strand found under the larger umbrella of Salafism, hasn't just been limited to the funding of madrasas and schools. The Wahhabi ideology has also been linked to many violent movements. It's been blamed for fueling the zeal of the 9/11 hijackers and for influencing groups such as Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, and ISIS.
It is correct to point out that some of the theology, dare I say much of the theology of groups like ISIS, actually do go back to the original teachings of the founders, which ironically, the mainstream bulk of the followers no longer follow anymore.
We're hearing news almost every other week of a bombing or shooting that takes place in a place of worship, on Jummah, for instance, on Fridays during the communal Friday prayer, where real devastation occurs just for the sole reason that someone has a different ideology or a different practice than the other.
The rigid Wahhabi doctrine not only took away much of the faith's spirituality and soul, it also allowed for religious symbols of the past to be wiped out.
Very extreme Wahhabi teachings have been responsible for the destruction of holy sites, and this has happened since they came into power. And the relics and the places of the Prophet ﷺ, and the family of the Prophet and their homes and their spaces have been demolished by the Wahhabis over time. They have destroyed sites of Islamic history in service of their singular ideology. They did not consult the rest of the Muslim world about these issues.
Some Muslims around the world acknowledge the Saudi government's religious legitimacy based solely on the fact that the holiest sites of Islam are under its jurisdiction.
The great conundrum for most moderate Muslims is that the two holy cities of Mecca and Medina have been in Wahhabi hands for 90 years. Saudi money has strategically silenced virtually all criticism in the international media.
So, is Wahhabism just another legitimate Islamic school of thought, or does it actually fuel sectarianism and violence?